Hello, guys and gals, and this is another reading from part 14, sorry. Yeah, this is part 14 of our reading of A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent, and it is a book by Marie Brennan. Anyways, let's go over the copyright information because that's important. This is someone else's intellectual property and not mine. It says it's copyright Sorry. It says it is copyright 2013 by Bryn Neunschwander, all rights reserved. Interior illustrations by Todd Lockwood, maps by Rhys Davis, and designed by Greg Collins. Now, in our last chapter, or the last part of this reading, they dissected a dragon, a rockworm, and when they went back, they found the body had been torn to pieces and carried away, probably by other dragons. And now they are wondering if maybe the dragons are eating each other and maybe it is making them go crazy and attack people. Lady Trent, aka Mrs. Camhurst, Isabella Camhurst, wants to go visit the Draconian ruins. But the gentlemen don't think it's really all that useful of an idea. So we are going to see how that goes. And here we go. Let's see. Find out where we left off. Some caddish. Okay. My husband had the grace to look awkward. It may seem a silly concern, but I do not like you going alone with that fellow. I mean, it would not look right. I raised my eyebrow at him. I was kidnapped by smugglers in the night, and he worried about my reputation if I went sightseeing with Astamir. But Lord Hilford spoke up. That's easily solved. My joints would never permit me a strenuous climb. That's a job for younger men. I'll go with your wife and keep her safe. Unless you don't trust my intentions, he mocked, leered, and I laughed, and that settled the matter. Oh, wow. I'm going to show this picture real quick. Excuse me. Let me go. Here we go. This is a picture from the book. It is a dragon-headed anthropomorphic dragon. Draconian ruins. And so, yeah. We're going to take a picture of that for now. And then do this. And we're going to have this on the screen while I read this section. Okay. It was a mark of the relaxed standards creeping up on us during this expedition that everyone accepted the propriety of this arrangement. Lord Hilford, though unmarried and not my husband, was judged a suitable enough chaperone, at least in comparison to a Vestrani villager. I have often found this to be true since that matters, which seemed terribly important in the early days of such a journey, in what will people back home say, fade into triviality with the passage of time. It has the consequent effect of making one question how vital those matters truly are, which goes some way toward explaining my increasing extravagant behavior as time went on. We set out at the crack of dawn, no camping gear this time. It would take about half a day to reach the ruins, but there was a hut used by the Boyer's huntsman, Astamir told us, in which we could pass the night before returning to Drustanev. Buoyed by the exciting prospect of our goal, we hiked quickly. After a few hours, the overgrown rectangular silhouettes of the ruins became visible on the opposite slope. But Astamir did not lead us directly toward them. Lord Hilford questioned him, but got enigmatical replies. I've half a mind to leave him. We can find our way from here, the Earl grumbled. I persuaded him not to. If anything went wrong, I could not hope to carry Lord Hilford back on my own, and soon had cause to be glad. The reason for our roundabout path, it seemed, was Astamir's sense of the dramatic. He led us down into the valley, then back up again by another trail, so that we might approach the ruins by way of their great gate. This stood cloaked in pines nearly as tall as the ancient stones, but the trees had no foothold on the gateway itself. The central figure strode out boldly on an outcropping of solid rock, its human feet planted on the ground, its draconic head staring through the clear mountain air towards Chiavara. Vestrani winters had been harsh to the mighty sculpture. Its features were so eroded as to be almost indistinguishable, and the lintel of the right-hand passage had fallen, leaving the unknown god with only one wing. The damage somehow made the figure more inspiring. Nowadays, we may carve as large as the Draconians. The Archangel in Falchester is even larger, but no amount of artistic weathering can counterfeit the sheer weight of time. I stood awestruck, pinned as surely as if a rockworm had swooped on me from the sky. My reverie was only broken by Lord Hilford's chuckle. Never been to the ruins at Nidel Tor, have you? My gaze was still lost my place, riveted to the statue, but the spell was weakening enough for me to respond. Only Millbridge, and those aren't very impressive. No, they aren't, he agreed. Nor is Nettle Tor, not compared with what one can find in the Achaean desert. Too much looting of stone for later use, but the gateway is in moderately good condition aside from the loss of the head. We went on talking. I think he said something about double gateways so characteristic of Draconian architecture and theories as to their purpose. My favorite is the one promoted by Mr. Charving, the great urban reformer, that the Draconians regulated traffic into their settlement by guiding arriving riders and carts through the left gate and those departing through the right. It is utterly fanciful, and no one had ever discovered evidence of sufficient traffic at these ruins to require such measures. But as Mr. Charving parlayed this into a very successful scheme for the regulation of traffic in Falchester, where it very much was needed, I cannot but applaud his rhetoric. I hardly attended to Lord Hilford's lecture, however, for I was already fumbling my sketch pad from the bag I carried. My hands found it and a pencil by touch alone, while my eyes gauged proportions and noted evocative details. There would not be enough time at these ruins to draw them properly, nor on this trip, at least, though my subconscious had begun to plot a return, but I could at least compose a brief sketch. Astamir was impatient with this plan. He could not understand why I wanted to stop out here without even entering the ruins. A moment more, I said absently, casting into the page a rough outline of the fallen lintel stone, cracked in two. How long ago had it fallen? It had rolled forward, but when it did, the face pressed into the earth might preserve more detail of the wing than now visible in the one still standing, but it would take a crane to lift the thing, and so its mysteries would remain hidden, alas. The promise of further wonders finally tore me from my work. I turned to a blank page and kept the sketchbook out as we walked beneath the surviving arch and into the ruins. That single day in Vestrani taught me more about working at speed than anything that had happened since. I threw down the most cursory lines suggesting the perspective and decay of the structures we encountered, and spent days afterwards filling in the details from memory. You may still see the results in Sketches from the Vestrani Highlands, published when I began to acquire enough notoriety that anything from my pen could turn a tidy profit. I do not recommend them for scholarly purposes. Too many of those remembered details are generic or downright fanciful, but they will give you a sense of the place. The Drusenev ruins are not extensive. Inside the gateway lay a large open courtyard, now thoroughly choked with underbrush and trees. Lord Hilford scuffed at the ground in one exposed spot and uncovered the chipped corner of a paving stone, tiled up at a sharp angle by a root thrust beneath. But we did not linger long, for Astamir was urging us onward to the main temple ahead. I call it a temple, though, of course, the function of those places has been debated ever since the day of the Nikians. All draconian structures are built on such an imposing scale as to inspire awe. We therefore naturally associated them with religion. Lesser edifices did not survive the thousand of years that elapsed since the dissolution of that ancient civilization. All we have now are the great works, and to what purpose would such buildings be raised, if not for the glory of their dragon-headed deities? A little further inward lay the pylons of the temple's front wall, too massive even for time to collapse them. Like the right-handed half of the gateway, the lintel between them had fallen, and an accumulation of debris and dirt raised the passage to nearly a third of the height of the wall. Astamir assisted Lord Hilford up this slope, then bent to aid me. My skirts caught on the undergrowth, and one wicked thorn tore a long rent in the fabric. But I did not mind. From the top of that passage I could see into the hypostyle hall, now open to the elements, the thin stones on its roof long since having relocated to the ground, where they lay nearly as buried as the paving in the courtyard. Some of the columns themselves had toppled, leaning against one another like drunken gentlemen exhausted after a night's carouse, or rolling in hefty cylinders on the ground. The sun was now high enough to make the space within the warm shelter secret and still. The proud figures of the draconian gods spanned the walls, flat and odd to an eye accustomed to modern conventions of perspective, but hinting at mysteries forgotten ages ago. I wished I were a painter to capture the quality of the light as it poured across those weathered shapes. Being only a poor woman, with a pencil, I marshaled my sketchbook and did what I could. Okay. That particular sketch included Lord Hilford bending to peer underneath one of the tilting pillars, pulling at the tall grasses that choked the space below. Before long, he called out to me. "Mrs. Camhurst, you must come look at this. Have you brought anything that might do a rubbing?" I obligingly fetched out a charcoal stick and a large sheet of loose paper, then picked my way across the space to join him. "What is it?" "Run your hand across this," he instructed me, as I had done with the dragon wing. What greeted my fingers, however, was not the microscopic roughness of the rock worm's hide. Instead, it was deep grooves, somewhat softened by the passage of time, but still clearly perceptible. Sorry. I crouched, trying to see, but after the brilliance of the sun, the shadow defeated me. With the assistance of Lord Hilford and Astamir, one man on each side of the pillar, holding my paper in place, I rubbed the charcoal stick everywhere I could reach. When we pulled it free, a white gap ran down much of the center. but to either side the charcoal smear was broken by an arrangement of lines I had seen before in books. "It's an inscription," I exclaimed. Even more than the art, whose strange, stylized nature had never really caught my interest, Draconic script excited a feeling of mystery and wonder. The markings were indubitably language, though men had once dismissed them as the scratchings of dragon claws. This is largely owing to the poor preservation of ruins in Antiope. Once our scholars became aware of less weathered inscriptions elsewhere in the world, opinions changed after a certain amount of hidebound resistance, of course. What message they conveyed, however, was completely inscrutable. Draconian writing had frustrated all effort to decipher it. With that clear example to hand, I gazed about with new eyes. I saw the weathering on the other columns for what it was, the faint, nearly obliterated remnants of more writing. There had once been inscriptions all over the columns of the hypostyle, but the exposed surfaces had been badly degraded. Lord Hilford ran his hand along the leaning column and brushed grit off his fingers. "Limestone. It hasn't survived well. The walls are marble. That does better. I wonder where they brought it in from and how." My finger traced along one of the gaps in the charcoal, following its raking line. "Why is it that no one can read what this says? Do we not have enough samples yet? If so, this one might be of some value." But the Earl shook his head. "That used to be the notation, but a fellow named Ibn Gattusi made a concerted effort, 10 or 15 years ago, to gather together all the known inscriptions and encourage people to document more. He published his findings in a great fat book, and a few years later the Achaean government offered a prize for the man who deciphered the language, but no one has claimed it yet." "We don't even know what language it was, do we?" I asked. That is obviously it's Draconian, or rather, that is the name we've given it, but we don't know what language Draconian might be ancestral to. Wait. Okay. With a grunt from his stiff knees, Lord Hilford knelt at my side to study the paper. "Precisely. So we have no idea what sounds these symbols might represent, or indeed what they do represent, or whether they do represent sounds. They may be ideographic, like the archaic scripts of the Ikwundi. Codes can be deciphered, but codes representing a known language, which means one side of the equation is already in hand. Draconian is a complete mystery." He smiled sideways at me. "Fancy taking a shot at it yourself, Mrs. Camhurst. The Achaean declaration did say their prize was for the man who sorted it out, but I dare say you could argue them into paying out for a woman." That notion had honestly not even crossed my mind. I laughed. "Oh no, my lord, I wouldn't even know where to begin. You've heard me butcher Vestrani." I nodded in the general direction of Astamir, who, having brought us as far as the hypostyle hall, seemed to think his work was done. That, or he had given up on the tedious, skirling scholars who kept pausing to examine things rather than continuing onward to new sights. I'm no linguist, much less an expert. I folded the rubbing carefully, though on the possibility that Ibn Gattusi might want it for his collection, and we spent some time poking around the ruined stones to find other bits with inscriptions not too badly weathered to record. I tore several fingernails digging up a fragment mostly buried in the earth, but was rewarded with the clearest bit yet, once I'd brushed the dirt away. The central chamber of the temple, unfortunately, had collapsed too through too thoroughly for us to enter. We instead toured the remainder of the small site, including the bit of wall I had glimpsed on our hunt. I clambered rather higher atop it than was likely wise, and spent some time attempting to guess which open bit of stone in the distance might be stained with the dragon's blood. When I climbed back down, peering past my skirts to see where I should set my feet, a twinkle of vivid color caught my eye. My foot, already descending, almost landed atop it. I swung wide and stumbled, but managed to avoid falling. As soon as my balance was secured, I bent double, searching for that glint of color. The grass half buried it, such that I almost missed it, but my fingers swept through the blades, touching something hard, and I lifted it to my eyes, and promptly dropped it again. This time the finding went fast. I knew what I was looking for: a firestone the size of my thumbnail and brilliant in the light. I cradled it carefully in my palm, marveling. There was no mistaking this for a piece of jewelry lost by some previous visitor. Quite apart from the unlikelihood of anyone so wealthy coming here in their formal gems, it was raw, not shaped by any lapidary's tools. What on earth was it doing in an obscure Vistani ruin? I dropped to my knees and cast around the grass, stabbing my hands on every twig and turning over every pebble. I covered an area of at least 5 feet in radius before I conceded that my find was a solitary one, but tremendously valuable. I had seen only a handful of firestones during my day in the marriage market, and those adorning the fingers or necks or ears of people far beyond my own class. This one, set into a pendant or ring, would be the finest jewel the Camhurst lineage owned. Do you understand? I'm not a covetous woman. Not for physical things, at least. Where knowledge is concerned, I am as greedy as the mythical dragons in the stories, sitting atop their glittering hoards. Though I, unlike those dragons, am not only willing to, but eager to share. But the Firestone entranced me, for it was the first I'd ever held in my own hand. I knelt there in the dirt, tilting it in my fingers so that the fire within danced back and forth until I became aware that I'd lost all feeling in my feet. Then I staggered upright and realized my companions had gone missing somewhere during my ascent of the wall. I was unduly concerned. Astamir was likely relaxing in a comfortable spot, waiting for us to be done. As for Lord Hilford, I thought it most probable that he'd returned to the hypostyle hall or the great double gateway. With my sketches of the site, I knew the most direct route back would be to go left across the broken, ruinless bit of ground. Halfway across the ground, something snapped beneath my foot, and I plummeted into the darkness. Not far, but it does not take much of a fall to twist one's ankle. Not when the fall is so entirely unexpected. I landed awkwardly and tumbled without grace to one side, fetching up at last on my rear, with one palm skinned and my cry of surprise still ringing from the walls. I clamped my mouth shut before a second cry could escape my lips, because 2 thoughts occurred to me in quick succession. The first was cave, and the second was dragon. My surroundings were undoubtedly natural. The light spilling in from above showed me rough walls and a sloping floor, unshaped by human hands. The hole I'd come in by wasn't nearly large enough for a dragon, but such a passage might exist elsewhere. The cave extended into the darkness, well beyond my ability to see. I sniffed, thinking I might catch a scent that would at least confirm my mortal peril, but all I smelled was pine. Pine, because those were the boughs that had been laid across the opening and then covered in needles until they matched the surrounding forest floor. A convincing disguise, but not one that could support my weight, and so I had fallen. A disguise implied a a disguiser. Someone had gone to effort to hide the opening, and not out of concern for public safety. I went very still. Only my ears moved, drawing back along my skull, as if that would make any significant improvement to my hearing. Eventually, those muscles tired, and I rubbed them with my fingers, thinking I'd heard nothing in the darkness and only the wind and the cry of an eagle above. The sensible thing to do would be to shout for help. There did not seem to be any person here at present, and if this was a dragon's lair farther along, I would do well to vacate the premises before the owner returned. But I am not always sensible. My eyes had adjusted as far as they could. Peering into the gloom, I saw that I had fallen quite near one end of the cave to my right. The floor sloped away into impenetrable darkness, but I thought I could make out some shapes at the edge of the void, brushing my skin palm clear of debris. I rose to my knees and made my way carefully towards those shapes. Crawling in a dress, for those gentlemen who have never had occasion to try it, is an exercise in frustration, all but guaranteed to produce feelings of homicidal annoyance in the crawler. But there was not enough room to stand without crouching, and I did not want to test my ankle just yet. The shapes, when I arrived at them, proved to be a pair of crates. I brushed my hand over the top of one and realized with a mingled feeling of horror and disbelieving hilarity what I had found. We are out of time for this. We're going to find out what she found out in the next one. We have been reading A Natural History of Dragons a memoir by Lady Trent. It is a book by Marie Brennan. If you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring that bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, all the information will be in the description below. There's also a link to our Discord server. And with all that being said, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.